Talk to fluency from beginner to fluent.
Take your English skills to the next level.
You know that feeling, right? When you decide, okay, I'm going to learn this new thing. Maybe it's an instrument or cooking or a language. And suddenly, bam, there's just this mountain of stuff.
Yeah. Information overload. Where do you even start?
Exactly. It's so easy to feel, completely overwhelmed. Well, today we're going to zero in on that feeling, but specifically for improving your English speaking fluency.
Okay.
We've been digging into a bunch of recent YouTube video transcripts, and they all offer kind of different takes on learning methods, practical phrases, stuff you can actually use.
Right, different angles on the same problem.
Yeah. And our mission here in this deep dive is really to sift through all that, pull out the best bits, the most powerful ideas from these sources.
Set through the noise.
Exactly. So that you, the listener, walk away with some clear, actionable ways to make real progress.
Sounds good.
Okay, let's unpack this.
So one of the first things that kind of jumps out when you look across these sources is this underlying question,
Yeah?
maybe even a debate in language learning.
Ooh, what's that?
It's about where you should focus first. What's the most important skill? Often people think, I want to speak better, so I need to practice speaking. Makes sense, right?
Yeah, seems logical.
But one source we looked at makes this really compelling case that maybe the most crucial foundational skill isn't speaking.
It's not speaking. Then what is it?
Listening.
Listening. Huh. That feels, well, kind of counterintuitive if your goal is speaking.
Yeah.
Isn't listening just, passive?
Well, that's what this source argues against, pretty strongly, actually. They say listening is anything but passive, provided you do it intentionally.
Okay. How so?
It's the main way your brain really internalizes the language's natural flow. Think about it. When you listen, you're hearing real pronunciation, the rhythm, the intonation, all that stuff that makes someone sound native.
Ah, right. The musicality of it.
Exactly. And it's how you start to just naturally absorb grammar patterns without having to sit there memorizing rules and charts.
So instead of just learning the rules on paper, your brain is actually mapping how the language sounds and how it works when people really use it.
Precisely. It's like building the blueprint in your head. And that source even brings up the polyglot Steve Kaufman.
Oh, yeah. What's his take?
He basically argues that getting really high listening comprehension is the absolute key. His view is if you can understand spoken language really well, then your speaking, your grammar, how you use the language, all that other stuff will naturally improve and just kind of fall into place because you've built that solid foundation.
Okay, that actually makes a lot of sense. And it connects really well to something in another source, that classic listen and repeat method.
Oh yeah, the old school way.
Right. It seems almost too simple, but it's directly training that connection between your ear and your mouth, isn't it?
It absolutely is. Source 1 really highlights that direct practice loop. You listen to how a native speaker says something, and then you immediately try to repeat it. You're actively training your mouth muscles to make those sounds, to mimic that rhythm. It's a really powerful way to make your own speaking sound more natural over time.
And that source also mentioned it's not just about the sounds, right? Actively repeating helps you process the information better. Remember it more than if you just passively listen.
Exactly. You're engaging more deeply. You move from just receiving the language to actively producing it, even if it's just repetition in a safe space.
Right. Okay. So if listening is this foundational piece, what are some specific practical methods these sources suggest for actually doing this, for mixing listening and practice effectively?
Well, one clear method from source 1 is that listen and repeat technique we were just talking about.
The old school one?
Yeah, they call it that, but they also make the point, hey, if it works, it works. Don't knock it. They describe it as being kind of like shadowing.
Shadowing.
Where you try to speak along with audio in real time. But listen and repeat is more like it's ready and served. The phrases are picked out for you, broken down. Easier to manage.
Gotcha. And that source talked about the benefits, right?
Oh yeah, several. Super useful for just practical fluency. Obviously helps pronunciation and flow, but your understanding and memory. And maybe crucially, it gives you this safe, low pressure space to practice. Builds confidence without the fear of making mistakes in a real conversation.
That makes sense. You can just focus on getting the sounds right.
Exactly. You're not trying to think about what to say, just how to say it. Source 1 even used the example theme of like shopping and transactions.
That's practical stuff.
Yeah, really simple everyday sentences that you could just listen to and repeat, ready for use.
Starting with those common situations definitely seems like a good way to build confidence quickly. Okay, so beyond just repeating, Source 3 had another idea, mixing listening with reading.
Yes, that was another interesting technique. They recommend listening to an audiobook while you're actually reading the physical book or the text on a screen at the same time.
Why does that help?
Well, Source 3 suggests it helps you stay focused. Sometimes just listening, your mind can wander. Right?
Definitely.
And seeing the words helps you deal with difficult vocabulary or maybe more complex sentences. You see how they're spelled, how they fit together. It just reinforces that connection between the sound and the written form, which actually Source 1 also mentioned as a benefit of listen and repeat if you have the text.
Right, seeing and hearing simultaneously. Okay, those feel like fairly standard, solid methods. But Source 3 also had some, well, pretty creative ideas using audio recording. Those really jumped out at me.
They are quite innovative, aren't they?
Yeah.
One idea was recording short audio messages just for yourself.
Like voice notes.
Yeah, exactly. You could use them to, say, recite new vocabulary you're learning, or maybe explain a grammar rule in your own words, or even just record some reflections about your day in English.
Okay, and then what?
Then the idea is you listen back to these recordings later, maybe when you're cleaning or commuting or whatever. It turns your study notes into your own little personal podcast.
Huh, a personal review podcast.
Yeah. They suggested it's surprisingly effective for really cementing information, maybe especially if you're prepping for a test or something.
Making use of that dead time by listening to yourself learn. Clever. What about that fake interview idea? That sounded intriguing.
Oh, that one's fun. Source 3 suggests pretending you're a guest on a podcast or a TV show being interviewed. In English, of course.
Okay.
You could talk about, your daily routine or describe where you grew up, maybe talk about your dream vacation, anything really. The key part is you record yourself doing it.
And the value is in listening back.
Exactly. That's where the real learning happens. You listen back and you can be objective. You can hear your own hesitations, maybe catch grammar mistakes you didn't realize you were making, or notice phrases that just sound a bit clunky or unnatural.
Wow, that's like instant feedback from yourself, being your own language coach.
Pretty much. And then there's the idea of weekly recaps, which kind of builds on that self-reflection.
How does that work?
Source 3 recommended recording a short summary every Sunday, maybe audio or video. You just recap what you learned that weekend. New words, new phrases. And importantly, they stressed making your own sentences using that new vocab. Don't just list the words, put them in context.
Active application.
Right. And you can also use that time to talk about how things went, any challenges you faced using English, things that went well, how you felt about your progress that week.
So it's intentional reflection, active recall, all kind of bundled into a regular review. That's smart. Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Source 2 came at it from a slightly different angle, didn't it? Focusing more on practical, everyday phrases learned through dialogues.
Yes, exactly. That source was really focused on teaching you language that sounds natural in very common everyday situations. Stuff you'd actually hear and need to use.
Like what kind of phrases?
Well, they broke down quite a few. For instance, in a bit of a hurry.
Okay, meaning you're rushed.
Yeah, moving quickly, don't have much time. They gave examples like, telling a taxi driver, "Can you drive faster? I'm in a bit of a hurry." Or telling a friend, "Sorry, can't talk now, I'm in a bit of a hurry."
Simple, but super common. What else?
Contact details, which is just, your name, phone number, email the info someone needs to get in touch, usually what's on a business card.
Right, for networking or just swapping info.
Then there was a really useful one, slipped my mind.
Yes, the classic excuse.
Exactly. For when you accidentally forget something, like, "Oh, I meant to email you back, it just slipped my mind." Or the dreaded, "Oh no, I forgot your birthday, it completely slipped my mind."
Happens to the best of us. They also covered those location phrases, didn't they? Around here and
around the corner. Yeah, they explained the slight difference. Around here means sort of nearby in the general area.
Like, is there a bank around here?
Exactly. Whereas around the corner is usually more specific, like on the next street. There's a great coffee shop right around the corner, just natural ways to talk about location.
Got it. And there was one more I remember. Terrible with.
Right. Using terrible with something is just a casual, common way to say you're not good at it.
Like, I'm terrible with directions.
Or terrible with numbers, or the one that gets a lot of us. Terrible with faces and names.
Definitely terrible with names sometimes. So these phrases, they're good examples of what Source 2 called was putting it together.
Yeah, putting it together, like knowing how words fit together naturally to sound fluent, and also building fluency builders.
Fluency builders.
Little phrases that just make your English sound more, well, authentic, like choosing to say, how's it going?
Yeah.
Instead of always using the more formal, how are you in casual chats.
Makes sense. Little tweaks for sounding more natural.
And that's Source. Source 2 even had that really relatable story about the sheer embarrassment of forgetting someone's name.
Oh, yeah. At a family reunion, wasn't it? A relative.
Which, let's be honest, who hasn't been there?
Right. But the useful part was the practical tips they gave for handling that, especially maybe in a work situation.
What were they?
Subtle tricks, really. Like asking for their business card because the name's right there, or asking them to write down their email address.
Because the name is often in the email address. Clever.
Yeah. Genuinely useful little hacks you could use if you're caught in that awkward spot.
Okay, so if we kind of zoom out a bit from the specific techniques and phrases, there seems to be a bigger theme emerging, especially from Source 3, about the whole approach to learning.
Yeah. What was that? About it not having to be painful.
Exactly. They made a strong point that effective learning doesn't have to feel like this constant uphill battle. It should be, challenging enough that you're learning, but easy enough that you actually stick with it.
Sustainable learning.
Right. Source 3 really pushed choosing content that you genuinely find interesting, and crucially, content you can understand most of.
Not something totally overwhelming.
No. If you pick something way too hard, where you only catch like one word in 10, you're just going to get discouraged. Better to save that super difficult stuff as a future goal and focus now on things that keep you engaged and let you feel like you're making progress.
That makes sense. And tied into that was the idea of being intentional, right? Source 3 emphasized being deliberate about practice.
Very much so. It's not just about passively having English audio playing in the background.
Yeah.
It's about focused, conscious effort.
Active engagement.
Yeah. They had a nice phrase for it, saying intentionality goes a long way, often much further than just, occasional bursts of sweating hard or forcing yourself to study stuff you hate. Consistent focused time with material you actually enjoy. That seems to be the key for the long haul.
Consistency over intensity, maybe?
Yeah.
And just to round things out, it's worth mentioning that the sources themselves pointed to some tools or resources that could help with these approaches.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
Well, Source 1, for example, mentioned an AI writing assistant. Quillbot was the example.
Okay, for checking grammar.
Yeah, or paraphrasing. But the point was, features like its different modes, standard, formal, creative, can show you various ways to say the same thing, which kind of feeds back into building that flexible, natural fluency.
Seeing different options. Okay.
And Source 3 mentioned online learning platforms, using Skillshare as an example.
Wait, for classes?
Yeah, but not just language classes.
Yeah.
They pointed out you can find classes on almost anything, time management, hobbies, whatever interests you. The idea being that finding engaging content in English, even if it's not about English, is part of that intentional, enjoyable practice.
So using English to learn other things you care about.
Exactly. These are just examples of the kinds of resources mentioned in the source material that can help you put these methods into practice.
Gotcha.
So what does this all mean?
Well, we've kind of journeyed through these different perspectives on boosting your English fluency, all drawn from recent online content.
Yeah.
We've seen this strong argument for really valuing listening as maybe the core building block.
Foundation.
Right. And we've explored a whole range of techniques, from simple, effective stuff like listen and repeat,
The old
or
school.
more creative things like recording yourself, doing mock interviews, or combining reading and listening.
Plus the focus on grabbing those practical, everyday phrases that make you sound more natural.
Definitely. And I think the big takeaway weaving through it all is the importance of being intentional with your practice.
Doing it on purpose, not just passively.
And ideally, finding ways to do it that you actually enjoy, using content that grabs you so it becomes something sustainable, not a chore.
Right.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this emphasis we saw on intentional listening, how really focusing your hearing can unlock so much pronunciation, rhythm, grammar, understanding. Makes you wonder, doesn't it?
Wonder what?
Well, if that kind of focused, deliberate attention applied to listening can build such deep understanding in language, what other hidden layers might you uncover by applying that same kind of active, intentional listening to, well, to everything else you encounter?
Like news reports or conversations.
Or even art or music. What nuances, what cultural context, maybe even what biases or assumptions could you start to perceive if you listened that intentionally across the board?
That's actually a really interesting thought, something to chew on.
Yeah, maybe something for you to consider as you start applying some of these fluency methods.
Talk to fluency from beginner to fluent.
Take your English skills to the next level.